Find a comfortable position now, whether you're lying down or curled up somewhere warm. Let your body settle into the surface beneath you and allow your eyes to gently close. Take a slow breath in and let it go. In and out. There's nowhere you need to be right now. Nothing you need to do. This moment belongs only to you. Let your shoulders soften. Feel the weight of the day beginning to lift from your jaw, from your hands, from the space behind your eyes. With each breath, you're drifting a little further from the noise of the world. Breathe in and breathe out. Imagine for a moment that the sky above you is deep and dark and full of stars. Ancient stars, older than any map or name, quietly watching over a world that has been turning for 10,000 years. You are safe here. You are held. And tonight, you are invited to travel. Welcome to Moonlit Dynasty, a collection of ancient stories from the heart of China. Tales of gods and heroes, of love and sacrifice, of the endless turning of the seasons. Stories that have been whispered for generations, carried by the wind across mountains and rivers, from the mouths of grandmothers to the ears of sleeping children. If these stories carry you gently to sleep, a subscription means the world to us and ensures the next story finds its way to you. Tonight, let one of those stories find you. Settle in, close your eyes, and let the old world carry you gently into the dark and into sleep. The four pilgrims walked slowly through a valley of soft green hills, the kind of valley where the wind does not hurry, and the streams seem to talk to themselves about old, gentle things. They had been walking westward for many years now. The road had worn them smooth, the way river stones are worn smooth, and each step felt less like effort and more like the natural breathing of their bodies. Tang Sanzang, the monk, rode his white horse with his eyes half closed, listening to the soft bell sound of the harness. Beside him walked Sun Wukong, the monkey king, his golden eyes scanning the hills the way they always did, though more quietly now, more out of habit than worry. Behind them came Zhu Bajie and the pig humming to himself, and Sha Wujing, who carried the luggage with the patience of an old willow. It was mid-afternoon when the monk grew hungry. The path had wandered them far from any village, and so Tang Sanzang lifted his alms bowl in his pale hands and said softly, "I will go beg today. Rest here, all of you. I will not be long." Sun Wukong tilted his head. "Master, let me go. You know what happens when you wander off." But the monk only smiled, the smile of someone who has been protected so often, he has begun to feel he ought to do something small for himself. "Just one bowl of rice," he said. "Just a little walk." And because the valley was quiet, and because the sky was soft and pearled with thin clouds, and because the disciples were tired from a long morning, they let him go. The monk walked alone along a thread of path that wound between flowering trees. Petals drifted around his shoulders. After a while, he came to a clearing where a low building of pale stone stood beside a slow stream. Smoke rose from its chimney in a curl, like a single calligraphy stroke against the sky. He thought, "This must be a quiet farmhouse, and there must be kind women within." And he stepped lightly to the door and called his greeting. Inside the cave house, for it was not truly a farmhouse, though it wore the shape of one, there lived 7 sisters. They were spider spirits, but they did not look like spiders. They looked like 7 beautiful young women in robes of 7 pale colors: silver, pearl, mist gray, plum, peach, pale jade, and the white of unspun silk. They were weaving when the monk arrived, and their looms made a sound like soft rain. When they saw the monk at the door, their eyes brightened. They had heard, in the way that demons hear, that the flesh of the Tang monk could grant long life. But they did not pounce. They smiled. They invited him in. They served him tea so weak, it tasted only of warm water and 1 drifting leaf. Tang Sanzang sat among them, drowsy with travel, and noticed only slowly that the room was full of threads. Threads in the air, threads from the rafters, threads that drifted out of the sisters' sleeves, the way breath drifts from a sleeper's mouth on a cold morning. The threads moved as if they were dreaming. By the time he understood, he could not stand. The silk had wrapped his ankles, then his wrists, then his shoulders, soft as cobweb, soft as snow. The sisters laughed gently, the way one laughs at a kitten that has fallen asleep mid-step. They lifted him without effort, for the silk did most of the carrying, and they bore him deeper into the cave, where the air was cool and smelled faintly of jasmine and old stone. They hung him from a high beam, wrapped in a soft white cocoon, his face peaceful, his eyes already closed. He looked, in the half-light, like a chrysalis or a hanging moon. The sisters returned to their looms. The silk kept drifting. The cave breathed. Back on the path, Sun Wukong's ears twitched. He had been sitting on a rock, half dozing, when the air around him changed in the way air changes when something far away has gone wrong. He stood up slowly. He did not shout. He did not leap into the sky in a thunderclap, as he might have done in his younger days. He simply tilted his head, listened, and then said quietly, "Baji, Wu Jing, he has wandered into something." The pig groaned and rolled to his feet. Sha Wu Jing tied the luggage to a low branch, set the white horse to grazing, and the 3 of them began to walk in the direction the monk had gone. The afternoon was still soft. Bees moved between the flowers without urgency. When they reached the clearing, Sun Wukong studied the little stone house with his bright eyes. He saw the curl of smoke. He saw the door left half open, and he saw, drifting from a high window, a single silver thread, moving as though it remembered being part of a larger weaving. "Spiders," he said. He sounded almost fond. He plucked a hair from his head, blew on it, and 7 tiny monkeys appeared in his palm, each no larger than a thumb. He whispered to them. They scampered up the walls of the stone house, slipped through cracks and seams, and disappeared inside. A moment later, all 7 sisters came out of the cave, laughing and chattering, and saying they wished to bathe in the warm pool that lay just behind the house. They had felt, quite suddenly, the urge to set down their weaving and walk barefoot through the grass. They did not notice the tiny monkeys riding in the folds of their sleeves. They did not notice that their feet carried them away from the cave by a path none of them had chosen. Sun Wukong waited until they had reached the pool. Then he gathered his cloud and rose gently up above the stone roof. He did not break the door. He simply made himself small, small as a moth, and slipped inside. The cave was a cathedral of silk. Threads hung in long, gentle curtains, swaying in air that had no wind. Light came through them in 1,000 soft refractions, as though one were standing inside a pearl. And there, in the heart of all the drifting white, hung the cocoon that held his master. Sun Wukong landed lightly on the beam beside it. He pressed his palm to the silk and felt the slow rise and fall of the monk's breath beneath. Tang Sanzang was asleep. He had been asleep, perhaps, since the silk first touched him. His face was soft and unworried, like a child's face in the deepest part of the night. The monkey smiled. He drew a strand of silk between his fingers, and instead of tearing, he began to unwind, slowly, carefully, around and around, the way one unwinds a long ribbon from a gift. The cocoon turned in the air, gentle as a lantern in a breeze. The silk gathered in his palm and dissolved into mist, for it was demon silk, and could not bear his touch for long. When the last thread fell away, he caught the monk in his arms, light as paper, light as a folded crane, and stepped down from the beam. He carried Tang Sanzang out of the cave on a small white cloud that smelled of cold stone and jasmine. Outside, Bajie and Sha Wujing waited in the grass. They blinked up at the monkey, and the monk drifting down through the late afternoon light. Tang Sanzang stirred, opened his eyes slowly, and said, "Wukong, I dreamed I was the moon." "You were close, master," the monkey said. "But the moon does not get eaten by spiders." They walked back to the road together. The 7 sisters, far down the valley, were still laughing in their warm pool, and would not return to their cave until evening, when they would find their threads dissolving in the dusk, and would understand, and would not pursue. Some demons know when a thing is finished. The pilgrims took up their road again. The white horse waited. The sun bent westward. They walked on. For many days after the Cave of Silk, the road was easy. The pilgrims passed through small villages where children ran out to touch the white horse's nose, and old men offered them tea in cups so thin you could see the steam through the porcelain. The monk gave blessings. The monkey juggled stones to make the children laugh. The pig ate every dumpling that was placed before him and asked very politely for one more. But at the edge of these gentle days, a mountain began to rise on the western horizon. It was not at first a frightening mountain. It looked, from a great distance, like a long sleeping animal, a ridge of dark stone with 3 high peaks, the middle peak slightly bowed, as though the mountain were listening to something below the earth. As they drew closer, the sky around the mountain grew strange. Birds did not fly over it. Clouds drifted up to its slopes, and then turned aside, the way travelers turn aside from a house with no lights in the windows. An old woodcutter on the road warned them. "That is Lion Camel Ridge," he said, leaning on his axe. 3 demon kings live there, very old, very strong. They have eaten everyone for 10,000 li in every direction. Even the wind goes around. Tang Sanzang folded his hands. "Then we will go through," he said softly, "for the road goes through." Sun Wukong, walking ahead, said nothing. He had been to many mountains. He could feel this one with the soles of his feet. It was not like the others. Something very old slept here, and something very old had woken. They camped that night at the foot of the ridge. The fire burned low and blue, as fires sometimes do when the air is full of waiting. Baji kept watch first, then Sha Wujing, then Sun Wukong, who did not really sleep so much as rest his eyes and listen. In the deepest hour, the monkey rose silently and walked a little way up the slope. He wanted to look at his enemies before they looked at him. He turned himself into a small moth and flew up into the dark, his wings the color of ash. At the top of the ridge, in a great hollow hall carved into the mountain itself, 3 thrones stood in a half circle. On the first throne sat a green-eyed lion with a mane like a thundercloud. He was so old that his fur had begun to turn silver at the tips, and when he yawned, the wind in the hall stirred. On the second throne sat a white elephant with tusks of carved jade. His eyes were small and patient, and he held a long spear across his knees. On the third throne, the highest, sat a great roc, a bird king, his wings folded around him like a black tent. When he shifted, feathers rustled like falling leaves, and the moon outside seemed to dim. The 3 were speaking softly, the way old companions speak who have known each other for 10,000 years. They were speaking of the monk. "He is near," said the lion. "His flesh is sweet, they say," said the elephant. "His monkey is fierce," said the roc, and he laughed without opening his beak. "But I have wings that can cross the world in a single beat. Let him come." The little moth on the rafter listened, and then flew quietly down the mountain, and became a monkey again at the foot of the slope. He sat by the dying fire and watched the embers breathe. He did not wake his companions. He let them sleep. There would be time enough tomorrow for the slow theater of demons. Above him, Lion Camel Ridge rose into the night, 3 peaks against the stars, like the 3 thrones of 3 sleeping kings. In the morning, Sun Wukong stood at the foot of the ridge and called up the mountain in a voice that was almost polite. "Old kings, there is a monk passing through. We would prefer not to trouble you. Open the road and let us by." The mountain answered with a roar that bent the trees. The Lion King came down the slope first, alone, his paws shaking small stones loose. He was even larger by daylight than he had been by moonlight, and his eyes were the color of pond ice. "Little monkey," he said, in a voice like a long, slow avalanche. "I have eaten 10,000 monkeys. I do not even count them anymore." "Then one more will not trouble your stomach," Sun Wukong said, and his eyes brightened, and he smiled the small, bright smile he wore when he was about to do something foolish. He shrank himself to the size of a sesame seed. He let the wind carry him up, and when the lion opened his great mouth to roar again, the monkey rode in on a single breath, light as dust. Inside the Lion King, the air was warm and red and smelled faintly of cinnabar. Sun Wukong stretched, looked around, and decided to make himself at home. He found the great cavern of the lion's stomach quite roomy. Large enough, he thought, for a little garden. He drew his iron staff out and made it as large as a tent pole, and propped it between the lion's ribs to keep things comfortable. Then he sat down, cross-legged, took out a small flask of wine he had been saving, and poured himself a cup. Outside, the Lion King staggered. He had expected to swallow the monkey and feel a small, warm satisfaction. Instead, he felt something poking his ribs and something tickling his liver, and a faint sound of someone humming an old song. "Come out," the lion roared. "It is very pleasant in here," Sun Wukong called back. "I think I will stay a few days. Do you mind if I light a small fire? It is a little damp." "No fires," cried the lion. He sat down heavily on the slope. The mountain trembled beneath him. The monkey began to dance. He stamped lightly on the lion's stomach. He swung from the lion's ribs as if they were the rafters of a temple. He sang a song he had not sung since he was young in the mountain of his birth. A song about the moon over a waterfall. The Lion King moaned. "Come out, monkey. Come out, and I will let your monk pass. Will you swear it, on the bones of your fathers?" "I swear, I swear. On the milk you drank as a cub? On all of it, only come out." So Sun Wukong made himself small again and stepped out lightly onto the Lion King's tongue, and from the tongue onto the grass, and stood there brushing his fur, as though he had only been visiting a guest house. The Lion King sat down on the slope, dazed and quiet, his ribs aching faintly with the memory of a small dance. But the Lion King, like many old kings, did not entirely keep his word. As Sun Wukong turned to go, the lion called for his brothers. Down the slope came the white elephant, his jade tusks gleaming, and behind him the air darkened. The great rock had taken to the sky, and his wings spread until they covered the sun. The three demons advanced together, and the road was suddenly full of shadow. Tang Sanzang sat very still upon his horse. Baji made a small, worried sound. Sha Wujing took up his staff, and Sun Wukong cracked his knuckles, smiled his small, bright smile, and rose into the air to meet them. The slow theatre of the last great trial had begun. The fight that followed was long, but it did not feel like a battle in the old sense. It felt more like a slow dance between very old beings who had each rehearsed their movements for 100 lifetimes. Sun Wukong met the white elephant in the air. The elephant's spear was quick, and the monkey's staff was quicker, and they spun around each other for a long time, leaves and dust rising beneath them, neither truly winning, neither truly losing. The elephant's small, patient eyes never blinked. The monkey's bright eyes never dimmed. When the elephant grew tired, the lion came up the slope to take his place, and Sun Wukong dropped down to meet him on the rocks. They circled each other on a stone plateau wide as a city square. The lion swung his great paw. The monkey leapt over it. The monkey struck. The lion ducked his ancient head. They were testing each other the way old friends test each other at chess, knowing every opening. But the third demon, the great rock, was different. He did not come down to fight on the ground. He waited in the upper air, where the cold begins, and watched. And when Sun Wukong rose at last to seek him, the rock unfolded his wings, and a single beat of those wings carried him 1,000 lis in the time it takes to blink. Sun Wukong gave chase. He summoned his cloud and rode it hard, but the rock was faster and laughed as he flew, and each time the monkey drew near, another wing beat carried the bird beyond reach. For a moment, only a moment, Sun Wukong felt the old hot anger rising in him. He thought of how, long ago, he would have torn the sky to find this bird. But he was not the same monkey anymore. He slowed his cloud. He breathed. He thought of his master, sitting on the white horse far below, waiting with folded hands. And then he turned his cloud around and rode it not after the rock, but upward, straight up into the high blue, beyond the clouds, beyond the wind, until he came to the place where the air shines. He bowed before the Buddha. The Buddha was sitting on his lotus, as he had always been, smiling the small smile he had smiled at the beginning of the world. He had been waiting. Sun Wukong did not even need to speak. The Buddha rose, and the lotus rose with him, and they came down together to Lion Camel Ridge, as gently as snowfall. When the Buddha set his foot upon the mountain, the lion stopped mid-roar. The elephant lowered his spear. The rock, far above, faltered in flight and circled slowly down. "Old friends," the Buddha said. His voice was no louder than a man speaking by a fire. "You have wandered far." The Lion King lowered his great silver head, and his green eyes grew soft. He had been the mount of the Bodhisattva Manjushri long ago, and had slipped his harness one quiet morning to see what the world tasted like. The white elephant had carried the Bodhisattva Samantabhadra, and had grown curious about the dark places. The great rock had flown beside the Buddha himself, and had been, in his way, a brother to the wind. They came to the Buddha one by one. They knelt. The lion's mane went dark and clean again, the silver tips falling away like old snow. The elephant's tusks shone. The rock folded his wings and grew small, and the shadow lifted from the slopes, and the sun came back to the mountain like a forgotten guest. The Buddha looked at Sun Wukong. He did not say, "Well done." He did not need to. He only inclined his head, the smallest motion, and Sun Wukong inclined his head in return. And a long understanding passed between them, the way understanding passes between two musicians at the end of a piece. Then the Buddha rose up into the high blue with his 3 old companions, and the mountain was empty, and the pilgrims walked through. Tang Sanzang rode the white horse along the cleared road. He did not speak for a long time. At last he said, "Wukong, the last great mountain is behind us." "Yes, master," the monkey said. The road bent westward, and they followed it. The sky grew gentle. Somewhere ahead, very faintly, they could already hear bells. After Lion Camel Ridge, the world changed. The pilgrims did not say so to one another, but each of them felt it in his own way. The colors of the earth grew quieter, as though someone was softly turning down a lantern. The trees were older. The stones along the road had a clean, washed look, as though rain had been falling here for many thousands of years, without anyone ever needing an umbrella. They walked through a valley where the grass was so soft it made no sound underfoot. They crossed a slow river on a bridge of pale wood, and the water beneath them was so clear that they could see fish drifting like brush strokes near the bottom. Tang Sanzang leaned over the railing and watched the fish for a long time, and the fish watched him back without fear. In one small town, they came to a temple that was not on any of their maps. The monks there bowed as if they had been expecting the pilgrims for 100 years. They served a simple meal: rice, pickled greens, a clear soup with 3 thin slices of mushroom floating in it like little moons. Tang Sanzang asked the abbot how far it was now to the west. The old abbot smiled. "It is no longer measured in li," he said, "only in steps. Take them slowly, They slept that night on plain wooden beds in a room that smelled of cedar. Sun Wukong lay awake for a while, looking up at the ceiling. He realized that he had stopped counting demons. He had stopped scanning the dark. He had begun, somewhere along this last road, to simply listen to the breathing of the others and to find it good. In the days that followed, they passed through forests where deer walked beside them without flinching. They passed through orchards of trees that bore fruit out of season. Peaches in autumn, plums in spring, all of them ripe at once. Baji, who had eaten his way across 2 continents, found that he was no longer very hungry. He picked a single peach from a low branch, ate it slowly, and was satisfied. Wu Cheng'en carried the luggage, as he had always carried it, but the luggage seemed lighter now. He noticed that the strap no longer cut into his shoulder. He noticed that he could walk all day and not feel tired. He walked and watched the road and thought of nothing in particular, which is perhaps the deepest kind of thinking. The white horse, who had once been a dragon prince long ago, before Guan Yin had turned him to a horse to carry the monk, walked with his head held high. His coat shone in the soft light. Tang Sanzang, riding him, sometimes reached down and patted his neck, and the horse made a small, contented sound. One evening, they came over a low rise and saw, in the distance, a range of mountains the color of mother of pearl. They were not high. They were not jagged. They simply rose, the way a sleeping body rises and falls with breath. Above them, the sky was a clean, very pale blue, with 1 or 2 clouds drifting like silk scarves. "Master," Sun Wukong said quietly, "I think those are the last mountains." Tang Sanzang said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "Yes, they camped that night at the foot of those mountains. The fire was small and warm. Baji did not snore. Wu Cheng'en did not toss in his sleep. Sun Wukong sat with his arms around his knees and watched the stars come out one by one. They came out gently, as though they were old friends arriving at a long-awaited gathering. Tang Sanzang sat beside his disciple. After a while, he said, "Wukong, do you remember the day Guan Yin set you free from beneath the mountain?" "I remember, Master." "That was 14 years ago." "Yes, Master." The monk smiled. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. The 2 of them sat together and watched the fire, and the night was quiet, and the last mountains waited, very patient, very near. In the morning, the pilgrims rose without speaking and began to climb. The path was easy. The mountains were not truly mountains, they discovered, but a kind of long, gentle slope, almost a meadow tilted toward the sky. Flowers grew along the path. Small white flowers with golden centers, the kind one sees in old paintings of the Western paradise. At the top of the slope, they came to a great river. The river was wide. They could see the far shore, but only faintly, the way one sees a memory. The water was perfectly clear, and yet they could not see the bottom. It was as if the river had no bottom, as if it went on down forever into a soft, bright nothing. At the near shore, a small boat was tied to a single stake. The boat had no bottom. They could see straight through it to the water below. A ferryman stood in the boat, smiling. He was a quiet man, with a smooth, brown face and kind eyes, and he held a long pole in his hand. "This is the cloud-reaching ford," he said. "Welcome." Tang Sanzang looked at the bottomless boat. He looked at the ferryman. He looked at his disciples. "How can we cross in a boat with no bottom?" he asked. The ferryman smiled. "Step in," he said, "and see." Sun Wukong nodded. He recognized the ferryman, though he could not say from where. "Master," he said gently, "it is all right. Step in." Tang Sanzang hesitated. Then he placed his foot upon the edge of the boat. The boat did not rock. He placed his second foot inside. And as he did, at the very moment his weight came fully into the bottomless vessel, something passed beneath them on the surface of the water. It was a body, the body of a man, floating face down, peaceful as a sleeper. A man in a monk's robe, with a shaved head, his arms drifting open at his sides. The body moved slowly past the boat, carried by the soft current. Tang Sanzang stared. "Who is that?" he whispered. Sun Wukong said very softly, "Master, that is you." The monk understood. He did not weep. He did not cry out. He simply watched as his own mortal body drifted away down the river. The body that had carried him through 14 years and 108,000 lie. The body that had been hungry and tired and afraid. The body that had borne every cold night and every hot road. He watched it go with the gentlest kind of love, the way one watches an old coat being folded away at the end of winter. The body drifted, grew small, and was gone. Baji stepped in next and laughed when he felt himself standing on nothing and yet not falling. Sha Wujing followed, the luggage on his back, his face calm. Sun Wukong stepped in last, and the white horse stepped in beside him, and the boat held them all, and the ferryman pushed off from the shore. The bottomless boat slid out onto the bottomless river. It moved without effort. The pole made no sound in the water. Around them, the air was full of soft light, light without source, the way light is in dreams. Tang Sanzang looked down through the boat and saw the river, and through the river saw the sky, and through the sky saw something he had no name for. He felt very light. He felt that if he wished, he could lift his hand and touch the stars, even though it was daylight. "Master," Sun Wukong said beside him, "we have crossed beyond the world." The monk nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. They drifted on. After a time, though time had become a soft, uncertain thing, the far shore drew near. And on the far shore, rising in the distance, they could see the slopes of a single great peak, green and clean, with a roof of golden tiles glinting at its summit. "Vulture Peak," said the ferryman. The boat touched the shore as gently as a leaf touching water. They stepped onto the far shore quietly, one after another, and the bottomless boat slid back out onto the water without anyone pushing it. The ferryman raised a hand in farewell. By the time Sun Wukong turned to thank him, he was already a small shape on the bright river, and then no shape at all, only a brightness on the water. The pilgrims looked at one another. They did not feel different in any large way, and yet they did. The monk's robes were the same robes he had worn yesterday, and the dust of 14 years was still upon them. But the dust seemed only to rest there now, lightly, like dew. The white horse's hooves made no sound on the stone path. Baji touched his own face and laughed softly, for he had expected to feel something strange, and instead he felt only quiet. The path up Vulture Peak was wide and clean. It wound between flowering trees whose petals fell upward as often as they fell down, as if gravity here were a gentle suggestion rather than a law. Music came from somewhere ahead. Not loud music, but the sound of distant bells, and beneath the bells, a low chanting, as though many voices were holding a single long note together. As they climbed, beings came down to greet them. A young Arhat with a peach-shaped staff bowed and smiled. A woman in robes the color of cloud held out her hands in welcome. 2 cranes walked beside them for a while, then lifted up and circled overhead. Even the air seemed to bow as they passed through it. Halfway up the peak, they came to a long stone bridge that spanned a small, clear stream. On the far side of the bridge stood a figure they all knew, Guanyin, the Bodhisattva of compassion, in her white robes, with her small jar of dew in her hand. She smiled at them. It was the smile of someone who has been watching a long journey from beginning to end, and is at last putting down her work. "You have come," she said. "We have come," Tang Sanzang said. She did not say more. She only stepped aside and let them pass, and bowed her head as they did. Sun Wukong, as he walked past her, met her eyes for a long moment, and she met his, and a small smile passed between them, the smile of 2 old gardeners who have, after many years, watched a tree grow tall. The path continued upward. The bells grew louder. The chanting deepened. At last they came to the gates of the Thunderclap Monastery. The gates were tall and red and very simple. There were no carvings on them, no gold leaf, no fierce guardians. There were only doors. They stood open. Beyond them lay a great courtyard of pale stone, and beyond the courtyard rose the high hall of the Buddha, with its golden roof shining in the soft sun. The pilgrims passed through the gate. The courtyard was full of beings, bodhisattvas, arhats, devas, dragons in human form, ancient monks with eyes like deep wells. They stood in long rows, silent and smiling, watching the 4 travelers and the white horse walk between them. No one spoke. There was only the soft sound of the bells, and the deep, low chanting, and the small sound of footsteps on stone. Tang Sanzang walked with his hands folded. Sun Wukong walked beside him, golden eyes wide and steady. Bajie, for once in his life, did not say anything. Sha Wujing carried the empty luggage strap with great care, as though it were precious. The white horse walked behind them with his head bowed. They came to the steps of the high hall. They climbed them slowly. At the top, the great doors stood open, and within, on a high lotus throne, sat the Buddha. He was as he had always been, small in a way, and yet large enough to hold the sky. His robes were the color of evening. His face was kind and very still. He looked at them as they entered, and he smiled the smile he had smiled at the Lion King on the slopes of Lion Camel Ridge, the smile that was older than mountains. The 4 pilgrims and the white horse came to the foot of his lotus, and they knelt down. The Buddha spoke softly. His voice was not loud, but it filled the hall the way warmth fills a room. "You have come a long way," he said. 14 years, 108,000 lie, 80 trials behind you. You have come for the scriptures, and the scriptures are here. They have been waiting for you. Tang Sanzang touched his forehead to the cool stone. We have come, world-honored one, to receive them. The Buddha turned his head slightly. Two of his great disciples, Ananda and Kashyapa, came forward. They were tall, calm men with the long earlobes of the awakened. They bowed to the Buddha and then bowed to the pilgrims, and they led the four travelers out of the great hall, through a quiet corridor, into a high room where the scriptures were kept. The room was full of soft light. Along its walls, on shelves of pale wood, lay scrolls without number. Thousands of scrolls, tens of thousands, more scrolls than any man could read in 100 lifetimes. Each scroll was wrapped in silk of a different color. The air smelled of cedar and old paper, the way the best libraries smell. Ananda and Kashyapa began to gather scrolls. They selected with care. They laid each one gently into a long lacquered chest. The chest filled slowly, and another was brought, and then another. The two disciples did not speak. The pilgrims watched. The white horse in the courtyard outside stood very still. At last, the chests were full and sealed. Ananda and Kashyapa bowed and offered them to the pilgrims. Tangsanzang received them with both hands. Wujing and Bajie loaded them carefully onto the white horse, who took the weight as if it were no weight at all. The pilgrims bowed deeply, thanked the two great disciples, and made their way back down the mountain. They had come a long way down the slope when Sun Wukong stopped. He tilted his head. He looked at the chests on the horse's back. He frowned just slightly. "Master," he said, "forgive me. Let me look at one scroll." Tangsanzang nodded, slow and uncertain, for he too had felt something. A lightness in the chests that did not match their weight. A hush where there should have been song. They set the bundles down on a flat stone beside the path. Pine needles lay scattered around them, and far below, the clouds turned slowly upon themselves like sleeping animals. Sun Wukong undid the silk cord. He lifted the lid. He drew out one scroll, yellow silk, neatly rolled, tied with a red thread, and held it out for the master to unbind. The thread fell away. The scroll unrolled across Tangsanzang's lap. It was blank. No characters, no ink, only the pale gold of the paper, smooth as morning water, catching the light of the high sun. They looked at each other. Pigsy leaned closer, squinting, turning the scroll one way and then the other, as if perhaps the words were hiding along the edge. Sandy unrolled another. It too was empty. A third, a fourth. Every scroll the same. Silent paper, perfect and white, holding nothing at all. "They have cheated us," Pigsy said, but his voice was uncertain, almost gentle, as though he himself did not quite believe the accusation. Sun Wukong did not speak. He was looking up the mountain toward the distant golden roofs of Thunderclap Monastery, and a small smile had begun at the corner of his mouth. The smile of one who suspects a joke older than himself. "Back," Tangsanzang said softly. "We must go back." So they climbed again. The path that had taken so long to descend folded itself kindly beneath their feet, and the lotus terraces opened once more, and the Buddha sat where he had always sat, the great calm of him filling the hall like incense. Ananda and Kashyapa stood to one side, hands folded, faces serene as carved stone. Tangsanzang knelt. He laid the blank scroll before the throne. He did not accuse. He only said, "World-honored one, the scriptures we were given have no words." The Buddha smiled. "The wordless scriptures," he said, and his voice was like a bell heard through deep water, "are the true scriptures. They are the teaching that needs no teaching. He who can read them has already crossed." The hall was very quiet. But the people of the East, the Buddha continued, are not yet ready for such reading. Their eyes still seek shapes. Their hearts still seek shores. Give them, then, the scriptures with words, so that they may have a raft, until the day they no longer need one. He turned his gaze to Ananda and Kashyapa, and the two disciples bowed and went away, and returned bearing other chests, heavier now. And from these chests came the soft, dry sound of ink on paper, of characters settled into their places, like birds upon a familiar branch. 5,048 scrolls, the full sum, the written law. The pilgrims bowed until their foreheads touched the cool floor. Tangsanzang's tears fell without sound. Sun Wukong, who had spent 500 years beneath a mountain and 14 on a road, felt something inside him lay itself down at last, like a tired animal finding its place by the fire. They repacked the chests. They tied the silk cords. They bowed once more, and once more, and once more, and then they turned and began again the long descent. And this time, the chests had the right weight, the weight of words meant to be read by those who still need words. Outside, the mountain was very quiet. The pines did not stir. The clouds had drawn themselves back like a curtain to let the pilgrims pass. 14 years had folded shut behind them. 14 years of dust and demons and rivers and prayer. And what remained now was only the road home. Gentle, downhill, lit by an afternoon sun that seemed in no hurry at all. Sun Wukong walked beside the horse. He did not speak. He was listening, perhaps, to the silence inside the chests, the silence of the wordless scriptures, which they had been allowed to glimpse, and which would travel home with them anyway, riding quietly beneath the written ones, for those who someday might be ready. The 8 Vajra guardians came for them at the foot of the mountain, as had been promised. They were tall and quiet, their armor catching no light, their faces calm as still pools. They spread a cloud beneath the pilgrims' feet, broad enough for 4 men and a white horse and the heavy gleaming chests, and then they lifted them, gently, gently, into the high air. The world unrolled below. Forests they had walked for months passed beneath in moments. Rivers they had forded with aching feet became silver threads. The mountains where demons had once waited were only soft brown wrinkles now, harmless as the folds of a sleeping blanket. Tangsanzang gazed down with something like wonder, for he had never seen all at once the great length of what he had crossed. Sun Wukong rode the cloud easily, hands behind his back. Pigsy laughed for the joy of swift travel. Sandy held the reins of the white horse, who was no longer a horse at all, but did not yet know it. And then, halfway home, the cloud faltered. It was the smallest thing, a tremor, a hesitation, as though the wind itself had remembered an unpaid debt. One of the Vajra guardians turned his calm face and said, almost apologetically, "Holy monk, you have endured 80 tribulations. The number required is 81. 1 remains." The cloud tilted. The pilgrims slid, slowly, kindly, as a child is set down from a parent's arms, and they came to rest upon the near bank of a wide, slow river, and the chests came down beside them, and the guardians bowed and were gone. Tangsanzang looked at the water and knew it at once, the heaven-reaching river. the river they had crossed 14 years earlier, on the broad green back of an old white turtle. The current ran easy in the afternoon light. A few reeds bent at the edge. And as they stood there, considering, the surface of the river broke softly, and a great pale head rose from the water, ancient, mossed at the brow, with eyes that had seen many seasons. The old turtle. "Holy monk," he said, and his voice was the voice of slow water moving over stone. "You have returned. Climb upon my back. I will carry you across as I carried you before." So they climbed, the master, the disciples, the chests, the white horse. The turtle bore them with the patience of his great age, and the river parted gently around his shell, and the far bank approached without hurry. Midway across, the turtle spoke again. "Holy monk, when you stood before the Buddha, did you remember to ask him my question? How many more years until I may at last shed this shell and take the form of a man?" Tang Sanzang was silent. He had not asked. In the great hush of the Buddha's hall, among the lotus terraces and the wordless scriptures, the turtle's small question had slipped from his mind like a leaf from a tree. "Old friend," he said quietly. "I forgot." The turtle did not speak. He only let out a long breath, a breath that smelled of river weed and patient years. And then, very gently, he tilted. He did not throw them. He simply withdrew himself, slipping out from beneath them like a tide going out. And the pilgrims and the chests and the horse went down into the cool brown water. It was shallow. They stood. They waded. They pulled the chests up onto the eastern bank, dripping. The scriptures inside were damp at the edges, soft as petals. This was the 81st Tribulation. It passed like weather. They found a great flat stone, broad and warm in the late sun, and they spread the scrolls open upon it, one by one, gently, the way one lays out a child's clothes to dry. The afternoon held still for them. A breeze, considerate and slow, moved through the reeds. Sun Wukong sat cross-legged on the stone and watched the characters drink the sun. Pigsy yawned. Sandy hummed something tuneless and soft. On the corner of one scroll, a single page tore as it was lifted, a small white wound that no drying would mend. Tang Sanzang touched it and smiled, for he understood. Nothing crosses without leaving something behind. Even scripture, even monks, even old turtles who slip away into rivers and are not seen again. When the sun had done its work, they rolled the scrolls and laid them back into the chests, and they turned their faces east. Chang'an was not far now. The road from here was only road. The road east took them through country that remembered them. Villages where they had once begged a bowl of rice now hung lanterns in their windows, without knowing why. Old men paused at their gates and looked west, as though listening for footsteps they could not quite hear. The land itself seemed to lean toward Chang'an, as a long-held breath leans toward release. And then, one morning, the great walls rose before them, grey and patient, and exactly as they had been left. The city had not forgotten. Watchmen on the towers saw the small procession on the western road, the 4 travel-worn figures, and the white horse, and the chests gleaming like banked coals. And a cry went up that travelled wall to wall faster than any messenger. The Emperor of Tang was already waiting. He had been waiting, in truth, for many years. Every spring, he had sent monks to the western gate to watch the road. Every autumn, he had said, perhaps next year. Now he came out from the palace himself, in robes the color of evening, and the ministers came behind him, and the monks of the great temples came behind them, and the people of Chang'an, bakers and weavers and children and grandmothers, filled the wide avenue from the gate to the palace steps, so that there was nowhere to set a foot that was not someone's place. Tang Sanzang dismounted. He walked the last stretch of road on his own feet, as he had walked so much of it. His sandals were thin. His robe was patched. He looked older than the emperor remembered, and also younger, as though something heavy had been set down at last, and his face had risen to meet the light. The bells began. First the bell of the great goose pagoda, deep and slow, then the bells of the lesser temples, one after another, until the whole bowl of the city was full of bronze sound. The pigeons rose, the banners lifted. The emperor came down the steps and bowed to the monk he had once called brother, and Tang Sanzang knelt and offered up the chests with both hands. The scriptures were carried into the palace upon trays of red lacquer. 5,048 scrolls. Each one was unwrapped and shown to the light, and the scholars wept, for they had not believed in their secret hearts that such a thing could truly be brought home. That night there was a feast. There was music. There were speeches and offerings, and the lighting of 10,000 lamps along the riverbank. The pilgrims sat at the highest table, Tang Sanzang at the emperor's right hand, the 3 disciples below, the white horse stabled in silk straw, and they ate, and they were thanked, and they were honored, but they did not stay. Even as the feast continued, even as the lamps still floated on the water, the pilgrims felt the call, soft, certain, unmistakable, the same wind that had lifted them onto the Vajra cloud. The work was complete. The scriptures were delivered. What remained for them was not here. They rose quietly from the table. The emperor saw and understood, and did not try to keep them. He only stood and bowed, very low, and the bells of the city went on ringing as the 4 pilgrims and the white horse walked out into the courtyard, and a cloud came down to meet them, pale, broad, patient, and they stepped upon it. The people in the streets looked up and saw them rise. A child pointed. A grandmother clasped her hands. The cloud climbed steadily, neither hurried nor slow, drawn upward like smoke from a quiet altar, like prayer at the end of a long evening. The lamps below grew small. The walls of Chang'an became a thin grey ring upon the dark earth. The bells, still ringing, became a sound felt rather than heard. Tang Sanzang turned his face west. Sun Wukong, beside him, did not turn at all. He had been looking west for a long time. The wind moved softly through his fur, and the cloud carried them gently. And the stars came out one by one above them, as the city of men fell away below. The cloud carried them west through the night, and into a morning that did not belong to any country. The sky was a soft, lit silver. The mountains below had become the idea of mountains, and ahead, rising out of the still air like a flower opening in slow water, was the spirit mountain again. But seen from a height now, seen from above, all its lotus terraces unfolded at once, like the petals of a single enormous bloom. They came down softly before the Buddha's throne. The great hall was full. Bodhisattvas stood in their ranks. Arhats lined the high galleries. The light here had no source and no shadow. It was simply the way things were. The Buddha smiled at the pilgrims as one smiles at children who have come home. "You have walked," he said, "the full length of the road. You have carried what was given. You have given what was carried. The work is done." He raised his hand. "Tang Sanzang," he said, "in a former life you were my disciple, the golden cicada. You fell because you would not listen. You have risen because you learned to listen at last. You are now the Buddha of sandalwood merit." And Tang Sanzang, kneeling, felt something settle upon him that was not a robe and not a crown, but was, somehow, the shape of who he had always been. "Ju Bajie," the Buddha said, "your appetites are still many, but you walked the road. You shall be the cleanser of the altars and eat the offerings of every temple under heaven." Piggsy beamed, scandalized and delighted. "Sha Wu Jing, patient one, quiet one, you shall be the golden-bodied Arhat." Sandy bowed his great head. "And the white horse, who was a dragon and who has carried the master without complaint for 14 years. Return now to your true form and coil about the pillar of the pagoda, and be honored." The horse lifted his head, and there was a shimmer, and a long, pale dragon rose into the upper air and settled, gleaming, around the highest column. Then the Buddha looked at Sun Wukong. "Stone-born one," he said, "monkey who was a king, monkey who broke heaven, monkey who walked the road. You are now the victorious fighting Buddha, Dogen Shengfu." Sun Wukong knelt. He had not expected to kneel. His knees did it for him. Something rose in his chest that he had no name for. Not pride, not joy exactly, but the long, quiet relief of a wave reaching the shore it had been traveling toward since the first wind. He remembered then the golden headband, the circlet that had ridden upon his brow for 14 years, that had tightened at every wrong turn, that had taught him through pain what kindness might have taught him through patience. He raised his hand to ask, almost shy, whether it might now be removed. His fingers touched his forehead. There was nothing there. The headband was gone. It had not been taken. It had simply lifted away on its own sometime along the road. Sometime he had not noticed. Perhaps at the river, perhaps at the wordless scriptures, perhaps long before. It had only ever been needed by the monkey he used to be. That monkey had walked out of the band, slowly over many years, and the band had stayed behind in the air like a ring of smoke, and then it had not been there at all. He laughed once, softly. The hall did not echo. The Buddha smiled. And then, gently, the great moment passed, as all moments pass, into the larger stillness behind it. The bodhisattvas resumed their silent standing. The arhats bowed their heads. The pilgrims, who were pilgrims no longer, took their places among the lit ranks of those who had come home. Far away, very far, on a green island in a green sea, a mountain still stood. Flower Fruit Mountain, where a stone egg had once cracked open in the wind, and a small monkey had stepped out blinking at the sun. The waterfall there still fell, white and ceaseless, into its deep, clear pool. Behind the waterfall, the cave still waited. The throne room of the Monkey King, swept clean by no one, kept ready by no one, quiet as a held breath. The peaches still ripened on their branches in their slow seasons. The small monkeys still chattered in the trees. None of them knew that their king now sat among the stars. And yet, In some way they could not have spoken. They knew. The waterfall fell. The mountain stood. The stars turned slowly above the sleeping sea. And the listener, having traveled so far, may rest now. The road is finished. The scriptures are home. The headband is gone. The monkey is free. Sleep well.